Welcome back to the Saffron podcast. In today's episode, we're going to be going over what we want our MVP or minimum viable product to be. Now, before we even get into that, I want to discuss a few things, and that is how we're distributing the podcast. So we're using something called Anchor, and I didn't know it took a couple of days, but we finally finished waiting for our accounts to be created. So we're now on Spotify, Google, Apple, all the podcast places. So you can now listen there, and I'll have a link in the description below if you want to listen that way. Also, I want to answer a few questions I saw pop up in the last video. The first is Saffron live? Can you try it? So right now we have not finished making it, and we're trying to decide what exactly we want to finish creating and what we want to polish up before we actually release this. And that's what we're going to be talking about in this episode. So you can't try it yet, but we're going to try hard to get a beta out so you can try it then. And then secondly, how much would Saffron cost? So here's our plan to monetize Saffron. We always see there being a free part of Saffron and then also having a paid version of Saffron where we do some kind of subscription model. Now, at first, when we first release, we expect everything to be free. And then we're going to add on more advanced features later that will be, if you wanted to use those features, but then you'd have to get a subscription or whatnot, something like that. So that's all the announcements. Let's go ahead and get started with the episode. So we're going to be discussing the minimum viable product. So here are some notes that my mom created on the minimum viable product. But I first want to explain what a minimum viable product is and why what we have over here and what you saw in the last video is not exactly a minimum viable product. So what an MVP is pretty much the smallest, or I like to think about it as something that's unique and very good that you can use on your own, but it's not very large. Maybe it's one single feature, maybe it's a really small thing. Pretty much, as the title says, the least amount of work you have to do to get a product that's usable / people can see and possibly get value out of. So that's where we're trying to decide what we want that to be for Saffron. Because you saw a whole bunch of features that we saw yesterday, and I would say what we have right now far expands what an MVP would be. We have too much stuff. And so one reason we haven't just released everything now is it's not all polished, and there's bugs, and there's pretty much stuff that we want to clean up on every single page. So something that we want to do is pretty much go page by page, clean up that page, fix some things about that page, and then release it. So what we're going to try to decide now is what is the minimum of Saffron. So we have a bunch of stuff on Saffron right now. What is the most important part about Saffron? Get that cleaned up and then release that first. And so we're going to try to decide what exactly we need to do for that. So coming back over here, Mom, you made these notes. You want to just go over what exactly this is?
We wanted to define what Saffron is and as a starting point. So I tried to put into words one sentence, and it's good to actually write it down and look at it and discuss it. So taking that extra step, I think, is important. So my attempt at that is Saffron is a digital cookbook to simplify your cooking routine. The other option is Saffron is a way to organize your recipes into cookbooks to simplify your cooking routine. So we'll be refining the wording and looking exactly at which one communicates better, but we want to make sure there's no confusion that this is a cookbook that's online for you to use. We're not producing cookbooks that we're going to be marketing or anything like that. So that's something we're aware of that we want to keep clear. And then after you create a sentence about your product, we looked at what the basic functionality needed to be. So we want it to be very easy to get your recipes online. We want a better way to organize and customize recipes. And we want to create the best cooking experience using a recipe online.
Okay, and why don't we kind of just break down each one of those real quickly. So to be able to get your recipes online, what is stopping you right now from getting them online or adding them?
Well, cooks will have recipes in many iterations. For example, some may be working from traditional cookbooks that are hardbound in print form. There are some people that are using online recipes with food bloggers. From food bloggers. There are some people that have recipes from their grandmother who maybe hand wrote the recipe out. So there's a lot of different ways that the recipe may come in, and we want to make that very easy to get that online.
Okay, so we already have one way to insert recipes, and that is to come over here and you can have, through this form, enter the recipe. So now we can actually do that for all three of those mediums. So whether you have a cookbook, you can type in the information, or whether that is an online blog, you can type in the information. Now, those are not probably the most efficient. So for example, if you're going to do an online or a physical cookbook, something where you scan the cookbook, for example, with your phone, and then it were to put the information here. Now that's kind of hard to actually build. And then secondly, something we have already. So this is what we're thinking about for cookbooks or recipes that are online. So for example, we're on a place called All Recipes, and you can see the content of the recipe here. And so what I would have to do is I would have to copy what the ingredients I have here, copy the name here, and I could insert into Saffron, and I'd be able to do that. But one tool we added to make that easier is a clipper, is what we call it. And you'll notice all the content is pulled out of the recipe here. Now something we're not able to grab right now is the image, and one of the reasons is because of our image requirements, which we might talk about later. But here you can see all the information, and what we can do is we can save it, and that'll actually redirect us to Saffron, and you can notice all the information is put into the form. So basically just sends all the data to Saffron, the web extension does, and you can just save the recipe there. So that saves a lot of time. So this is one way that we've improved online recipes, and that's something I think a lot of people have. So I guess, what do you think? Do you think a clipper is something that would be in an MVP? Because the user could just type it by hand in the form. So we do cover that. Do you think the clipper should be in the MVP?
I do, because the easier we make having the recipes in Saffron, then all the other features that we're planning to add are going to be more meaningful. And we are expecting some investment from the user to put the recipes in. So I want it to be an experience that they're very comfortable with, that's easy to do, that can be part of their routine, and not something that's burdensome.
Now, let me ask you this. So for the MVP, something we could do. Now, whenever we release the MVP, what I want to do is then after that, continuously updating it and continuously adding on to it. So if we release Saffron with just the form, and then a week later we add the clipper, what do you think about that? Is it even useful just with the form?
Yes. I mean, like you demonstrated a minute ago, you're perfectly able to create a recipe using the form. It's hard to know how many people are clipping from the internet. We do know that a lot of people do go to other social media sites like Pinterest to look at recipes, and that they also want a way to bring the recipe from Pinterest into Saffron or an online recipe manager. So that's something else that we would probably do, but it probably would be down the road.
So yeah, for example, I think in a week we could clean up the clipper, because there's some problems with how the clipper works right now. But I think in a week we could get that into a pretty good shape. So for example, I think, what do you think about releasing the MVP for Saffron, have that being without a clipper, week later polishing up the clipper, and then adding that?
I think that's fine. I also like the idea about the onboarding process, having some recipes readily available in the product or that you can add to the product so that the person using it can really see what it's supposed to be. Because like you said, when you first launch Saffron, it is empty. So you do need to fill it.
Yeah. So right now, whenever you create a new Saffron account, there is pretty much no recipes in it at all. So that's something we also want to add before the MVP is some sort of onboarding process to make it easier for you to feel what Saffron is like and try it out. So to do that, we're thinking about adding maybe some sample recipes that either you can pick from or almost like have, when they open Saffron, have like a cookbook they can already pick, for example. Let's say they already have this cookbook open on it and they can play around with the recipes and do stuff with. So one of those, we can decide exactly what we want for the onboarding to be later. But okay, I think that's a good thing we've established. So at least for the MVP, the only way to insert a recipe, at least for the very first one, is going to be through a form of some kind, right? Now, I think we want to polish up the form a little bit, and so that's something we can do, especially because this is going to be our only way to insert with that. All right, so let's move on to the next thing. So the next thing, that pretty much covers your first point, except for, I would say, exporting recipes, which you have down here. So being able to export recipes, I think, again, that's another thing that we can, doesn't need to be a part of the MVP, mainly because let's say that's in week 2 or week 3 that we add exporting recipes. I don't think someone needs to export a recipe the first time the reason why exporting is helpful is because if you have spent some time in Saffron putting all your recipes in, you want to be able to export that data out so you don't waste your time if you ever want to leave Saffron, for example. So that's why we're going to add exporting. I think it's fine to add exporting at a later date. The first time we start Saffron, no one has a bunch of recipes that they want to export out right away, right?
The importing and exporting to me is important because if I was evaluating different recipe programs, I would want to know if I, for example, was in another product and unhappy and I was thinking of migrating over to Saffron, is there a way to bring those recipes in? So importing from another...
Okay, so importing is not just from a blog, but that's from another place.
Yes, that's what I meant by importing here. And then the exporting is important because if I'm going to spend time entering things, I want to make sure that they're still available to me. And again, there will always be a free level, so you can always use Saffron. But again, if somebody... we don't want to hold recipes hostage or make you feel like you have to stay. So we want that to be upfront and clear. I think it's going to be part of their decision to whether or not they want to spend time using Saffron. And the easier you can make that sound, I think the better. Okay,
well, first off, with importing, I think we can use the same argument we use for the Clipper. That's something we can add very quickly after the MVP launches. Do you agree?
Yes, I think the form is definitely a priority.
Okay. And then with exporting, I think, again, I think that's a nice feature to have. And I think that's something that is not MVP. I think that's something that we can add, for example, 2 weeks, 3 weeks after launching the MVP version. Or do you see that's something you want in the MVP itself?
It's a little hard for me to answer that because I do know that when I evaluate any app that I want to know what I'm getting into. And so I feel better about saying I'm going to log in, I'm going to set up an account if I know up front some of these things. So it might be a little slower for people to try it.
Okay, so you see exporting as a marketing thing. So you see exporting as something that will help us get users.
I do.
Okay, in that case...
And importing.
Okay, in that case, I don't think when we first release MVP, we're going to be marketing right away.
Okay.
So in that case, I think exporting can wait. If exporting is something you want to use as marketing, like no lock-in, for example, then I think we can wait on adding exporting till we're ready to start marketing it.
Okay.
All right, so let's move on to the next thing then. So is there anything else you want to cover in the first bullets?
No, that's good.
All right, so the next one you said organize and customize recipes. So what are you wanting to be? How are you wanting to do that?
Well, right now in Saffron, when you look at that custom cookbook view that we have been showing you earlier, where you have a table of contents and you have cookbooks that you can go in and out of.
Yes.
That's where I see a lot of the customization happening. And we, down the road, also want to offer different looks to the recipe, because we know some people have styles that they want to incorporate into maybe the way their cookbooks look. So that's something we're wanting to do.
Okay, so you want to be able to customize the look and feel of this
down the road.
Okay, so that's not an MVP thing, so we can throw that out. Anything else? So right now we are able to organize recipes into cookbooks. So these are the different cookbooks. Mm-hmm. And then inside of a cookbook we have sections, and inside of sections we have recipes.
Yes. Is
there any type of organization you want on top of that, or do you think that's enough for an MVP?
I think this is a solid start.
Okay.
For the organization.
Do you feel like we're missing anything for that?
I think the actual cookbook creation could be refined more as far as the actual execution.
The way we do it, yeah.
Yes. And by that, I find that I want some more advanced filters on the search when I'm actually finding recipes and I'm actually putting them in cookbooks. Because sometimes recipe names can be similar, or you're not sure it's exactly the recipe that you're adding. And there's no way in this view to actually click on the tiles to the right. Those are just titles. They're just for adding directly into the recipe on the left.
Okay, so this is when you're actually creating a cookbook and you're wanting to be able to add recipes to cookbooks.
Yes.
Now, I also think this is something where we're able to add to the bottom. So at the bottom of our form, when you add a recipe, you can actually select which cookbook you want it to be added to. So it's only when you're, like, for example, building a cookbook and you already have current recipes that we want to update, right? And maybe add some filters to be able to search here.
Yes.
So yeah, we can talk about what we want to improve about each page in a different episode. I want to just cover the pages that we're actually going to include and the ones we're going to improve. So we have this browse. Do you also want to have search be an MVP?
Yes. And the reason I say that is some people may not remember the title, may not remember how things are organized or where you've put things. And the search is kind of for sure you're going to find your recipe under search. So, for example, I have created many cookbooks, as you see on the previous page, and I'll sometimes forget where I might have put something. And I think I asked you about this one other time. Should we, in the recipe view, be able to tell what cookbook it's associated with? So right now we don't have any development done on actually referencing where it is. So if you say I do a search and I find a particular recipe, I don't know when I click on it what cookbook this is in, and I might want to know that. So we might want to add a way to see where that cookbook is.
Sure, but that would be an advanced feature or something that wouldn't need to be an MVP.
Okay.
So, I think search is also good. I think we may even want to add... I'll ask you this. What do you think? Do you think we have enough ways to view a recipe? So, for example, I can view a recipe through the cookbook, or I can view a recipe through search. Right now, we don't have a place where you can pretty much view all your recipes, for example, no matter if it hasn't been categorized yet. Do you think that's okay, or do you think we want a screen? I know we added a screen on the app that was recent recipes, so you can see the top 10 recent recipes, but even then, you're not seeing all your recipes. So, for example, right now, if you cannot find a recipe, so let's say you added a recipe to Saffron, You didn't put it in a cookbook. You forgot the name, so you can't search it. The only way to find it is to be able to go to build a cookbook and then to look for it there and the bunch of tiles that we have. And then you'd be able to find it there. But the only way to actually view it from that point would be to add to a cookbook, and then you could go into the cookbook and find it. Do you want a screen where you can actually view that, all the recipes, or is that even something necessary for an MVP? Or do you think search and cookbook is enough organization?
I like the recent recipes added because usually they're more likely to have not been added to a cookbook. So I think that's helpful. The search, I really like what you've done with search because if I don't remember the title, I'll remember an ingredient I used. And I can put that ingredient in search and the recipe will come up. So I'm able to find that there.
Okay, so the only thing you would maybe want is the recent recipes.
I think the recent recipes is really helpful because, again, that tends to be something that may not have been filed yet into a cookbook.
I think that we can safely push to a later point.
Okay.
Because we don't even have it on the website built yet, too.
Correct. I don't know that seeing all your recipes right now
is vital.
I don't know how helpful it's going to be because it's a lot to look through. And again, unless we want to look at filtering it through the search, then you're back to having a search.
Okay, so why don't we leave that as a question, and then at a later point we could reconsider. Because if we're questioning whether or not it's useful or not, that's definitely not something we'd want to add to the MVP anyway. Okay, so is there anything else to cover being able to organize your cookbooks? So right now we're going to have, you're going to be able to search to find recipes. You're going to be able to put your recipes into sections in cookbooks. Do you want anything else for the MVP, or does that cover it?
I think that's good.
Okay, so let's move on to the last part here. You have...
Can we touch on customization for a second?
Yeah.
Because I do think this is something that Saffron is really strong in, is making the recipe the way you want to cook. For example, being able to separate your ingredients based on how you're cooking something. Sometimes you have a list and everything applies to that recipe, but then there's sections of the recipe. Here's a good example here where the first section of ingredients are part of creating the beans. The next part is having to do with toppings. It's really helpful when you're cooking to be able to, at a glance, distinguish what ingredients go with which part of the recipe. And so somebody could actually set this up very easily and also create a section for notes, maybe in the instructions, where you could personally adjust things or edit things the way you want. It's very easy to edit the content.
That's something I want to add on to as well. So right now, if you edit this recipe, the way we have just this thing on the side here is it's just a big text field. So if I edit the steps, here are the texts, and I don't think the font is rendering in Firefox. I remember that because I see a different font here. Anyway, you'll notice the text looks like this, and to add a header, we just put a star in front of it, which isn't a great way to be able to do this. I want to also be able to support, for example, links, bold, italic, and be able to have this as kind of like almost like a mini editor for the right. So that's something I want to add probably before we even do the MVP too, is a better experience. Be able to customize what your instructions look like. So it's almost like you can add headers and whatnot. And then also links, like I said. And so I'm going to create, there's a good library called Draft.js that allow you to create an editor experience for adding that instead of just, for example, just a big text area. There'll be a lot nicer experience. So you mentioned being able to add that, and then you also said notes. So right now we don't want notes. Do you want notes in the MVP?
what I meant by notes is in the instruction section that you just pulled up, I create a section for notes a lot of times for my recipes. I know down the road we're going to have another way of handling notes, but for now I'm putting them in a section with a header, and that's, again, a quick way I can look at the end and find out sometimes there's an ingredient that's unusual, where to shop for it. There's a lot of things that are helpful that are
that are not outside the actual instructions.
Correct. Okay. Or maybe where to find what kind of stores carry certain things, or...
Okay, I think it's covered then. I think we don't need to add a separate notes section. You can add that to the instructions itself in some kind of side thing. Okay, anything else you want to touch on about with customization of recipes?
I think that's good.
Okay, so what's the last part?
This is something overlying everything we do with Saffron, is we really want this to be a great experience, and be something that can be used daily, with anytime you cook. So having it be simple to use and have it fit with all the tasks that go with cooking is kind of what we're looking at. Most people don't think about how many steps there are to making your dinner. And if you were to back that out from a programming standpoint and try to streamline that and get the best workflow, I look at how to get the best workflow for cooking. Right now, it's... There's a lot of people that are maybe using to-do lists. There maybe still people are printing things out from printers. There's just a lot that takes time away from the actual cooking part. So
what are you trying to say here? Are you trying to say you want to have all the things be in Saffron so you don't have to go to other places to fill your needs?
Yeah, for the MVP, that's the basis of it.
The MVP, that we wouldn't be able, that would be an overarching goal.
Right.
We wouldn't be able to cover all your cooking needs in one place. That's not something that's MVP possible. Well, at least the type of MVP we're going to make. That's too much.
Right. But I guess I want the foundation of the MVP to support that direction. That a lot of the tedious tasks that go with cooking that can be automated. And that it's a good experience when you're doing that you want to cook with it, that you want to...
Okay, so what does this map to? So you said those things. What kind of features would that mean in an MVP?
I guess below we kind of are listing what the features are. We talked about the search feature, the overall UI, in that it is something you can use on a mobile, because I see some people that will work on a desktop when they're working with this product, and I do myself. I create a lot of my recipes on my desktop, but when I actually use it, a lot of times I'm using it from my phone.
Yep.
So grocery shopping, I'm cooking from it. Adding stuff to the menu planner. So all of those things I'm doing on the phone. So when I talk about that experience, there has to be a good integration, and that the product should be seamless, whether you're on a desktop, whether you're on mobile, and the UI should be very friendly, easy to understand.
Okay, sure. I think also, I guess the question then is, do we want to have... I don't think we should include the app in the MVP, but I think that should be something that comes quickly after our first launch, because I think an app is helpful. Now, one thing that I think right now, for example, the MVP or the current app right now, or not app, but the website, it doesn't look great on mobile. So if I were to go open up this website on mobile, it does not flow super well. So I think some things, we've also talked about this before, it doesn't make sense on mobile. So for example, no one's going to be entering a recipe on their phone. Well, at least that's what we think. We don't think anyone's going to go through the process of filling out a whole entire recipe on the phone. And so that's one thing we just like when we were building the app, just totally ditched. So
well, we talked about having a way when you're in the other devices to actually have a sharing type feature.
But that's different. That's importing again.
Right. But
we're talking about an actual form. We're not going to have a form where you can type it out.
No form, but we are going to have the functionality of.
But that's one of our hypotheses. Is no one's going to want to do that.
Correct.
But maybe
it's just
we're
very
wrong.
Tedious.
Yeah. So, for example, I think. So when we do the MVP, should we work on, for example, making this view look good on a mobile device? So the cookbook view, so where I'm able to see my cookbook, my sections, and the recipe. So assuming, should we include mobile friendly for the MVP? So we'd have to basically, right now, if we open this screen on mobile, I don't think it looks great. So being able to improve that, should we add that in MVP?
I guess it depends how far the mobile. I think the mobile app is going to be the best experience. So I guess it's nice to use this on the mobile. I guess if there's going to be a lag between when the web desktop version is created versus the app, then I'd like to support use on the mobile. But ideally, having the app.
Okay,
finished.
So if we better spend our time in releasing the app, so like if it took, let's say, a month longer to release the app, but we made the website all mobile friendly, you'd rather have the app released a month earlier?
I think the app is going to be, yes, a better experience. So I don't know if you just have the desktop, how helpful that is. If you don't.
The website, you mean?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah, because this is not a desktop application. This is just a website. Okay, so you're saying you don't know how useful just a website is for Saffron.
Correct.
I think being able to just view the recipe from the computer you've used before, though. Yes,
I actually would set up my laptop. Prior to us building the app, I used the laptop all the time in the kitchen. And that was very nice.
Okay, so that would be a good MVP, and then we can make the experience even better.
Yes,
by adding an app.
And that's what I was about to say. I was really happy with that. And then once we started doing the prototype for the mobile, it was just really nice because the phone you can whip out, and it doesn't take up a lot of space in the kitchen. And I prefer the mobile experience over the laptop for cooking.
Okay, so let me outline. I think I have a good idea of what you want for the MVP. Let me outline what pages I think, and you tell me what you think. So we're going to have a page where you can create recipes. So a form, and then you can also see a preview on the right side as you're filling out the form. And then also a way to categorize these recipes into cookbooks. So some kind of page to create cookbooks, and then to add the recipes to the cookbooks, and then a place to view the recipes in their cookbooks and view the cookbooks, view the sections, that sort of thing. And then a place to search, to be able to search through all your recipes. And then another thing we need to improve is both the landing page and then onboarding. And things we are not going to include in the MVP is, for example, the grocery list, creating a menu planner, and viewing a menu planner. Is there anything, does that sound correct to you?
Yes.
Okay. So then the next thing that I want to do, this is pretty much all I want to cover in this episode, is exactly what we're going to do with that. What I want to do in the next episode is kind of flush out on each one of these pages what needs to be improved upon them to get them in a state where they are MVP ready. So that is it for this episode of the Saffron Podcast. We'll see you guys next time.